John just commented, he said, but didn't talk about John. Actually he did. I'll just take 30 seconds to make a moderator's comment. Not only does the Commission use economists in the ways that Jonathan described, but historically there has been a symbiotic relationship between what the agency does and its use of economists and actually the further development of economic theory. I'll just give two examples that show that the things that have come before the agency has actually helped advance economics as a discipline. One is the idea of the modern sense of natural monopoly, the formalization of the idea into cost subadditivity. All of that was an outgrowth of a debate that occurred in the late 60s about how to cost the services of a multi-product monopoly. The agency had put forward the so-called seven-wave cost study, and the Bell system in trying to react to it, retained Professor Bolmol and other very fine economists to develop arguments supporting a more economic approach. All of that over a period of years led to the development of the modern multi-output theory of monopoly, a topic that economists really at a formal level hadn't done much with since the time of Hicks in the 30s or 40s. So that's just one example. The other, more recently, is auctions at the FCC, which has proved a crucible for development of auction theory to a rather remarkable level. And I could give you other examples. So there's a clear interplay back and forth between not only the application of economics, but the impetus for the further development of economics. I hope that process continues. Maybe we'll have the next innovation before you leave, Jonathan. Our last speaker this morning is the Phoenix Center Chief Economist, George Ford.
Well, since everybody else had a disclaimer, I should say that I'm not speaking for myself, but for God Almighty. Just so everybody knows that's clear. And I also would advise you to warn your new econometricians to be careful sipping lattes and talking about co-integrated vectors. Apparently that is forbidden territory at the Commission. Before I begin, I would like to note War Damn Eagle, my alma mater. The best that money can buy is our new motto, and as an economist, you always enjoy seeing your investments pay off, as you say. I'm going to spend a little time today talking about competition. I'm going to go very fast. I may lose some of you in the process. I'm going to try to keep it simple. I think this is a pretty important topic, and I think it's going to lead us to a very interesting place, as you will see. It's sort of a classic Ford, I think, today, returning from his year off last year. This is a graph. We have the number of firms on the horizontal axis. We have dollars on the vertical axis. I have 2 marked points. I have PM, which is the monopoly price, and MC, which is marginal cost, okay, which would be a competitive equilibrium. We have ideas in economics, or models of economics, and they're described as Cournot competition, Bertrand competition, and of course collusion and cartels. In the Cournot case, as the number of firms rises, we have this sort of gradual decline in price. The first couple of guys have a bigger effect than the latter ones, okay? And price just sort of moves its way down towards the competitive level, never quite obtaining it, at least the marginal cost pricing. There's always some markup over marginal cost. It gets very, very small at a large number of firms. The Cournot model is the model we use mostly when we talk about competition in public policy. We want more competitors, and we want more competitors because they bring lower prices, and this is the mentality that we're using. You can also express price as a function of the Herfindahl index, which is another, using the Cournot model, which is another tool that we frequently observe used in economics, in public policy. The alternative to this is called Bertrand competition, okay? And in this case I'm talking about firms selling identical goods or homogeneous goods is what we're talking about. In that case, you have the monopoly price with one firm, and if a second firm enters, price immediately falls to marginal cost, and you get the competitive output or the marginal cost pricing output. Okay, and that's the difference between the two. Now, the difference comes from the firms behaving in different ways or making different choices. Cornell firms choosing quantities, Bertrand firms choosing prices. So you get this interesting difference between these two. What normally the Cornell model is what people have in mind when they think of public policy debates in most cases. The other option, of course, is collusion or cartels, where the monopoly price persists regardless of how many firms you have. Okay. Now, in fancier theories, as the number of firms get bigger, this becomes harder to maintain, and you may eventually see it fall off. But in the very simple cases, and I'm going to stick to that, we have these are our outcomes. So take a good look at this and think about it, because this is going to come back up in a minute. There are some interesting twists to these models, which we often see in public policy work. I've used them, and Jerry and I used to use them at the FCC when I was there. One is Bertrand competition with capacity constraints. Okay? Now, if you recall, in the Bertrand model, the second firm, you end up with marginal cost pricing. We often call that the Bertrand paradox, because it's kind of a weird outcome with only two firms for that to occur. But what we have with capacity constraints is in a firm, in a sense, has chosen his quantity, which is what happens in the Cornell model. In the Cornell model, firms choose their quantity, they take their quantities to the market, and the market clears. In the Bertrand case, firms choose prices, and they cut price, and they get business, and then the other guy cuts price, and they get business, and the other guy cuts price, and they get all the business. If you put some capacity constraint on it, the thing starts to look more like Cornell, where there's a quantity that I've chosen, my capacity level. Okay, so Bertrand competition with a capacity constraint ends up looking more like Cornell in the sense that prices are above marginal cost even as the number of firms rises. Okay? And economists spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we get this Bertrand model to make more sense, because generally we think of firms competing on price, not choosing quantities and showing up at the market with some basket of goods. The other way you can resolve that problem is to allow firms, the products to be a little bit different, so that when a firm cuts his price, he doesn't get all the customers, he'll get some of them. Okay? And we could think of it in sort of two dimensions. Okay? You can't see, it's actually a shaded area here where the range of prices is. We can get Bertrand with no differentiation, homogeneous goods, which is just marginal cost pricing with two or more firms, just like we had in the original case. And then we can have Bertrand competition with high levels of differentiation, and the goods can be so different, in essence, that the two products become monopolist. If we think of sort of this continuum between homogeneous goods and completely differentiated goods, but you got the whole scope. They can be a little bit different, in which case price will be slightly above marginal cost, or they can be a lot different, in which prices move towards the monopoly price. Okay? But with product differentiation, as a general matter, we can get the full range of prices from marginal cost to monopoly by adjusting the degree of differentiation. Is everybody with me? Okay. The problem with marginal cost pricing in telecom, which is one reason we economists like to use different models like differentiation, capacity constraints, and that sort of thing, is that you can't really have marginal cost pricing in telecom because the marginal cost of most of the stuff is zero. And we can't charge a zero price because you do have fixed cost to the network. So in general, we think, and this much of the regulation was, what's the best price to charge where we don't have to tax everybody and subsidize the industry and that sort of thing, and this, average cost pricing, Ramsey pricing, those sorts of concepts, where price is raised above marginal cost to avoid the case here where we end up with a loss because if price would equal marginal cost, we wouldn't cover the fixed cost of the business and would have to subsidize the firm in some way. Okay? Is everybody with me? All right. Phoenix forbearance order. You ready? So here we go. Forbearance is based on whether the provider no longer has market power. It's the new market power standard. Okay? There was a proceeding, but it's been eliminated, which I'll talk about in a minute. Competitive conditions, these are quotes from the order. Competitive conditions might justify forbearance from union obligations if the petitioner could demonstrate that it lacks market power. Okay, it's a market power standard. Market power is the power to control price, resulting in prices above competitive levels. Okay, so you think, all right, okay, I'm okay with this market power thing. I mean, the guys that do this thing is like, well, okay, this doesn't really help me all that much to start with. So we need a little more clarity here on what we're talking about. And the clarity is, what do you mean by the competitive level? Okay, if we're going to review the evidence, we have to say, well, what is it that I'm comparing to? Well, here's where the whole lecture on Bertrand and Cournot comes into play. Under Bertrand competition, in which the firm maximizes its profits by choosing the price at which it will sell its output, duopoly will yield a competitive result under certain assumptions. Duopoly will give the competitive result, or the competitive level of prices, under certain conditions. These conditions are perfectly homogeneous products and no capacity constraints. Okay? What is the outcome with perfectly homogeneous products in a Bertrand model? Marginal cost pricing. See where I'm going? What is the competitive level Bertrand with homogeneous products? Pricing of marginal cost. Right? That's the standard. Now, you're going to say, Ford, you overstated the case. I know Brennan's over there thinking, I'm thinking of Brennan here. He's going, well, Ford, you're a nut. Ford, you're crazy. That can't be what they said. And I've heard that from 2 or 3 people as I brought this up, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy, because sometimes I am crazy. Or all the time I'm crazy, just sometimes I can control it. What the FCC meant wasn't that marginal cost, this Bertrand homogeneous products thing, that's not what this is. Well, I mean, if we had marginal cost pricing, of course, that'd be good. That'd be enough, right? I mean, it's a sufficient condition. If we were to see that, yeah, everything's fine. But there might be something less than that, okay, that we would be willing to accept. Okay? But I'm not crazy. Because if you look at the order, what did they just say? They said, firms have some degree of differentiation, prices are above competitive levels. Okay? You don't get forbearance of prices above competitive levels. I just showed you in the graph that some degree of product differentiation means every price between marginal cost pricing and monopoly price. So every potential price has been excluded from equaling the competitive level but one, which is defined to be the competitive level, which is marginal cost pricing. The Phoenix order rejects all prices but marginal cost pricing. So it's not about necessary and sufficient. Okay? Marginal cost pricing is the necessary standard. Now, Ford, you're crazy. Okay? And I heard this from a lawyer, not an economist. Economists wouldn't say this. The FCC order relates only to the rejection of duopoly. It's a duopoly issue, right? Because we don't want to deal with the duopoly problem. All right? So, but that's not true either. Because if you read the order, it says all these ugly things occur with few firms. All this ugliness occurs with oligopolies. They use the word. I'm not making this up. This is a quote. And that argument would also imply that marginal cost pricing is required for 2 firms, but would be happy with a cartel of 3. So you see that that really doesn't work either. Okay? So what have we got? Well, the Phoenix Forbearance Order establishes a standard of marginal cost pricing for forbearance. Is that clear? I mean, am I going too fast? Okay. This contradicts telecommunications economics at the most rudimentary level. Okay? Now, I don't know if the mistake was intentional. You know, it just got wrapped up in our discussion of Bertrand and Cournot or not. But that's what the order says. Commissioner Robert McDowell. Okay, I think he pretty much nailed it. I don't know if he understood what I'm saying or had forecast what I'm saying, but he said this analysis may set a bar too high, and there's no question that it does. Marginal cost pricing is not feasible in telecommunications. That's just lesson number 1, I think. All right, so other implications of the order. TELRIC is unjust and unreasonable. TELRIC's above marginal cost. Okay. TELRIC is unjust and unreasonable. The other one is the order actually can't claim that these are just and reasonable outcomes because Marginal cost pricing does not permit the recovery of costs, it's confiscatory, therefore it cannot be just and reasonable. So you can pick which interpretation you want, they both work. Okay? They're different, but they both work. Now let's look at the competition issue a little bit. Here's what the Phoenix Order says. Economic theories hold that firms operating a market with two or few firms, oligopoly, are likely to recognize mutual independence, blah, 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 collude, engage in strategic behavior, high prices, yada, yada, coordinated interaction. National broadband plan. Building broadband requires large and fixed sunk costs and will probably have relatively few competitors, but the lack of large numbers of users does not necessarily mean competition among broadband providers is inadequate. While older models of competition emphasize the dangers of tacit collusion, the newer models do not. Okay, these two, I think, were put out within the same year, maybe, I think. Is that true? Probably within 6 months of each other. The 1960 style competition analysis and then the more modern analysis. Okay, now, Master Yoda, Jerry over there, would be very upset with me if I didn't say, well, how do we fix this problem? So I will offer some path forwards. What we really need to be talking about is realistic expectations. I think this is probably the theme of the Phoenix Center research for the next year or two. And that is realistic expectations with regard to competition and regulation. What is the equilibrium level of competition in communications markets? What can we really expect? And let's quit talking about having 100 firms or 10 firms or 20 firms. You're not going to get it. Okay? The great threat in telecommunications is fewer firms, not more firms. I don't care what policy does, you're really highly unlikely to make more competitors. Okay? The efforts of the FCC to create more wireless competition with this little thing with Harbinger, the guy just is hawking his art, man. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, all right? And then what can regulators really do? Okay, what can they really do? And this, everybody views that the regulator can snap his finger and make whatever outcome. We want the regulator to have an open internet. Okay, what's the rule? Write me a rule that makes that happen. Okay, nobody's doing that. We want an open internet. I don't even know what the hell that means. Realistic expectations. Okay, look at Phoenix Center Policy Paper number 10, number 21. Okay, it's a nice, I mean, we're summarizing other research. This is not us making stuff up, okay? They're just sort of consumable pieces of modern views of competition and industry structure. John Sutton, a great book. Louis Phillips, this guy's brilliant. He's written a great book. I won't run that quote by you because I know I'm running out of time. But, you know, this stuff is in FCC orders too. I just showed you the National Broadband Plan. The 1995 Cable Competition Report, the first Cable Competition Report, has an Appendix H in it, which outlines the whole thing. Okay, it was a nice piece of work. Okay, 1995, the Commission began talking about competition in more realistic and economically legitimate ways. Okay, it has worked its way into a few orders, but very few. But it has worked its way in. The unbundling orders had some of the discussion, although they messed that up, as I made clear in some papers that I wrote on the application of that. But you see it in Uni Remand, you see it in National Broadband Plan. I think some of the competition reports are discussing this. I think the CMRS, recent CMRS report thinks about competition in a more sensible way. Realistic expectations about regulation. Now we were talking, Tim was talking earlier about duopoly, and I thought, oh, this is great. He's sort of setting it up for me. The only time Congress has ever defined effective competition that I know about was in the 1992 Cable Act. And the 1992 Cable Act was, you know, I mean, it was price regulation. It was about as heavy-handed as you could get. That was some serious effort to regulate an industry. Now, the statement of policy was, we're cable television systems are not subject to effective competition, and I want to make sure that the rates were just and reasonable. So we're using the same language, just and reasonable, all that, right? Effective competition essentially exists. I won't read the whole thing, but effective competition is defined, among other things, small providers also are effectively competitive, when you got 1.5 competitors, when you got half a competitor, 1.5 firms. That's effective competition. If there's 1.5 firms, the FCC is told to get out. Stop regulating prices, among other things that were in the Act. Okay, 1.5 firms, that's the HHI, 7450. Okay? Congress said, FCC, you can't beat 1.5 firms. This is effectively what they're saying. You can't do better than that. And I think we have to start thinking, really, what do you do? I have written many papers for example, in special access, and I get through it and I think, this may be a problem, but how the heck do you solve it? I mean, really, what do you do? Do you make discounts illegal? I mean, you know, how do you make it work? I mean, sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you walk away, and I think Tim's right. We should make people convince the government that regulation is necessary, and not only that, but they have to write the rules that make it happen and tell me why it works and why there's not unintended consequences. I want somebody that says, we want an open internet, to say, what are the rules that make an open internet? Okay? I want more competition. Well, I want a toilet made of solid gold, but it's just not in the cards now, is it? Right? Thank you for your time.